Hello and welcome. It's an emotion we've all felt at some time or the other, that sinking feeling, that agonizing spasm, the burning cheeks. Yes, I'm talking about embarrassment. Embarrassment has its own painful cringe-making place in everyone's memory, and even many years later that feeling can linger. Even watching complete strangers on television can trigger that response. For example, on Monday, Miss Universe's pageant held in Mexico, Miss USA lived every beauty queen's nightmare, taking a spill during the evening gown competition. Well, her poise disappeared for a second before she jumped up and carried on. On today's show, we take a close look at the emotion of embarrassment, its causes, and even some cross-cultural differences. Don't forget, you can contact us with your phone calls and mobile texts on this program. The numbers are there at the bottom of your screen right now. Well, joining me to discuss the psychology behind the phenomenon of embarrassment is Ray Crozier, the Professor of Psychology in the School of Social Work and Psychosocial Sciences at the University of East Anglia in Britain. Professor Crozier has authored several books on the topic of shyness and blushing. His latest work, Blushing and the Social Emotions, was published in 2006. Professor, it's great to have you with us.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here.
Well, sir, I have to start by first getting your definition of embarrassment. What exactly is it?
Well, embarrassment is a temporary loss of poise in a social situation when something happens to kind of disrupt the normal flow of the situation, and you're usually at a loss what to do next. It's usually a rather unpleasant experience, although one can recover from it with humour or with good luck sometimes.
Now, you say an unpleasant experience. What made you want to write a whole book about it?
Well, I was particularly interested in blushing because it's such a very common experience, and yet we know hardly anything about it. And when you look more closely at it, it becomes quite a complicated issue. So I really wanted to explore it and to find out more about the situations that made people blush or made them embarrassed.
What is the difference between embarrassment and blushing as such? Because they're not technically the same thing, are they?
No, well, blushing is quite a specific physiological reaction involving kind of reddening of the face, neck, and sometimes the upper chest, and it often accompanies embarrassment. But it seems that we can blush when we're not embarrassed, and we can be embarrassed without blushing. So they go together, but they're not quite the same thing.
Well, my rather mischievous crew put a picture of me done to made look like I was blushing just a moment ago. I know I joke that because of my colour, which I'd like to think of as Herculean bronze, is one that doesn't allow me to blush visibly. But that's not quite true, is it?
I think, well, as far as we know, everybody blushes. Blushes is common to everyone, whatever their skin pigment or complexion, but it's clearly more visible among some people than it is in others. So that for most of us, blushing is really a visible reddening of the skin accompanied by a raised kind of temperature, this kind of hotness of the face that you feel. But for people, say in other cultures, and say the British culture or people with different pigmentation, perhaps it's the feeling of increased temperature in the face that defines the blush rather more. But
I was reading,
however
Professor,
visible it is, we still blush.
Yeah, no, Professor, because I was reading that you said that one of the more common questions you get about blushing is, do only white people blush?
Yes, and that seems not to be true. It seems to be a human universal, but the experience is slightly different because if it's highly visible, you're more aware of it, and actually being aware of blushing tends to make you blush even more. So it can be kind of vicious circle of blushing, thinking about your blushing, and blushing even more.
Now, is there a scale of embarrassment as such, from the sort of I can't look them in the eye to I wish I was dead or something like that?
Yes, I think embarrassment can range from very mild kind of embarrassment to quite intense embarrassment that kind of verges on feeling shame. And I think some embarrassing situations are so temporary that they pass very quickly, but others are the sort of things that you might brood about for a long time afterwards, and they would still be very unpleasant experiences. So they do seem to vary in intensity.
Now, is there any potential psychological damage? And it sounds extreme, but from people being put into, if they're particularly prone to being embarrassed, is there any potential psychological harm done to them by being put into difficult situations all the time? Can it make someone a nervous wreck?
Well, it would depend, I suppose, on the personality. I think you can perhaps learn to cope with embarrassment. So if you did encounter it, you could cope with it. But some people do find it very difficult to know how to cope with, and it can lead them to sort of avoid social situations, perhaps avoid interacting with other people if they fear it quite a lot. So it can be very disruptive for some people's lives, certainly.
Well, if it doesn't embarrass you, Professor, share with us a few of your own worst embarrassment stories, starting not with your own personal one, we'll get to those in a moment, but what are the worst stories you've heard from other people?
Well, a lot of stories involve really the one that you introduced the item with, really having something awful to you happen in front of a large number of people, such as slipping, falling over. That kind of thing it can be very embarrassing, and that's frequently mentioned. And saying something really silly in front of a lot of people, that's frequently mentioned as well. So those kind of faux pas and so on are very common. But other kind of situations that are embarrassing are perhaps more surprising, in that being kind of congratulated or thanked and so on, that can be embarrassing as well, although it doesn't seem to be anything very unpleasant about it. We can often find that quite hard to cope with as a situation.
I was thinking, because it's possible to blush when you're actually being complimented, or one's being complimented, or being given something in a positive. So it's not necessarily an embarrassment as such, is it?
No, but certainly it's being the sort of focus of other people's attention, or being aware that you're the focus of other people's attention. And when you kind of begin to think about that, you tend to blush. So that's a very common elicitor of blushing, is just this sense that you're being looked at, or people are suddenly paying attention to what you're saying.
Well, let's have a confession, Professor. What was your most embarrassing situation, if you're willing to reveal it?
Well, I find situations like forgetting someone's name quite embarrassing, especially someone's name you really know. So if you come to introduce them to a third person, and then suddenly you just can't, for the life of you, recall your name, and you're just kind of stuck there, and you just don't know quite how to get out of this, because you know you ought to know the name, and there's no kind of excuse for it. That's kind of particularly embarrassing.
I'm going to go through a couple of... Sorry, Professor, I'm going to go through a couple of emails that we had that came in when we told people our topic of the show. The first one from Glashütten in Germany. Di Mitchell says, "The hot flash, lack of coordination, confidence killer, well, who needs it? Most people take great steps to avoid it. It does seem to be the byproduct of negative peer pressure. I stopped being affected by it when I stopped caring what others thought of my actions."
Yes, and I think one way, well, it's a difficult question now. I mean, one way to avoid blushing is to be less self-conscious, to think about yourself less. But I think both blushing and embarrassment can serve very useful social functions. They can help us a lot. So one wouldn't want to go to the extreme of being so insensitive to other people that we might be shameless or unblushing or unembarrassable. I think embarrassment is something that's kind of, although it can be unpleasant, it is something that's useful, because it kind of helps us to deal with situations that go wrong in ways that don't involve aggression. So if you were to jump the queue, for example, or stumble into someone, or hit them with accidentally with your umbrella, I mean, they would react as if you were being very aggressive or rude. If you didn't show signs of embarrassment, if you blushed, for example, they would kind of be more likely to forgive you and see that it was accidental and that it was unintentional. So blushes are very useful for conveying apologies, for example, for acknowledging that you've done wrong, for diffusing a situation that could actually become much more serious. So it has a positive side.
Well, another email we got from Lynn in Australia, and bear with me, it's quite long. I'm going to read it out to you, Professor. It says, "I studied in a co-education convent school. The girls and boys were allocated separate rooms on different floors of the convent in which we were staying. Instead of going to the next floor, I hopped off on the boys' floor, and when I rang the bell, one of the classmates opened his room door, and to my horror, I saw him without a stitch of clothing. Both of us blushed and fled for our lives. I can never forget the embarrassment it caused, and I felt sheepish to even look at that boy ever again. I don't know if he felt the same, because I believe boys' memories are short and they move on fast. Two questions that come out of that. One, men and women, a big difference in the way they react, in your opinion? And secondly, I guess memories really do linger, and perhaps in the long run it can affect the way someone deals with the situation based on their past experience.
Yes, the gender, I'm not sure about the gender differences, how large they are. Women certainly report more embarrassment than men, or they tend to do so, but whether that's that they're just more aware of it than men are, maybe they experience it to the same degree, but they're more kind of reflective about their social behaviour and more conscious of it. That might be one reason for this. The kind of situations that men and women mention seem to be roughly the same in terms of what embarrasses them, and that kind of exposure of the self that you've just described is very commonly mentioned by both sexes as a kind of cause of embarrassment. It doesn't necessarily have to be a kind of a physical exposure. It can be exposure about some kind of information about yourself you didn't want other people to know. That can be embarrassing.
Right. In terms
as well. Yeah.
In terms, Professor, of the lingering memory aspect in that email, yes, about how men move on faster, you think it sort of sticks with people and affects their behaviour, changes behavioural patterns?
Yes, I think some situations make you cringe years after they happen. Just to recall them can actually recreate the embarrassment. Others are the sort of things that you laugh about afterwards, but some of them definitely are just as embarrassing years afterwards as they were at the time. Particularly kind of very salient events, very highly memorable events, like the one that you've described, or making a great faux pas in front of a large audience, things like that, would you just look back on
We've got a call
without
here.
Much pleasure.
We've got a call here from Dublin, Ireland. Nice to hear from Benedicta in Dublin. Go ahead, Benedicta.
Hi, good day.
Hi.
I just wanted to share my experience many years ago while I was still in college. I hope you would not be embarrassed to hear this. I was having my periods and I felt like I had actually messed up myself, and I walked to the lecturer to obtain permission to go out. And then he sent a female student to tell me that I had messed up my dress. I felt like melting, and for 2 weeks I didn't go to his class, so it was, every time I remember the experience, I'm embarrassed all over
Benedicta?
again,
Benedicta, what I'm going to do is, I'm going to ask the professor, is there, you said that, it's a safety mechanism in terms of it can help diffuse attention, it can, it can help to actually ease a situation of tension, but I wonder if someone goes through something embarrassing, such as Benedicta did, can it be as lingering for the other person? For them, it can, especially if they're particularly sensitive, it must be quite a difficult thing to handle.
Yes, I think everyone involved in the situation could be embarrassed. Not just the person who sees this, or experiences this particular event, but other people can be very embarrassed about it. Particularly the more that they're involved in it, whether they're actually talking or interaction with the other person, they can find it embarrassing and lingering embarrassment as well. And I think that's one of the sort of interesting things about embarrassment, is that you can feel it for someone else as well, which is interesting.
Let's look at how it might vary between cultures. And we've got an email that came from Muriel Eaton in Montreal in Canada, and go through this quickly with you. Being from France, I can tell you that that some of the French love the game of embarrassing others. We use the expression mettre en boîte, to put someone in a box, or maybe corner someone. But on the other hand, I think French people are often too proud to allow someone to embarrass them. They will fight back with all the energy they can muster. So I guess culturally there must be some differences. Have you come across anything like that? I think the experience of embarrassment is pretty universal, but what would embarrass people would vary from one culture to another. It hasn't been much research really, but I think there is some evidence that is the case. And one often thinks of English people, for example, as being easily embarrassed and so on. Well, Professor, just going to read one out. No need for you to comment on this. An email from Judith in British Columbia in Canada. It shows how sentiments are sometimes here from our viewers. And it says, should we embarrass George W. Bush, Cheney, etc. by outrightly confronting their obvious involvement in the criminal planning and cover-up of 9/11? They're obviously guilty, so they technically should be embarrassed with confrontations of the obvious and plain truth. I'm not expecting a comment on that since it's a political comment from one of our viewers, but I do want to thank you, Professor, for being with us and examining the emotion of embarrassment. It really was a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you very much. It's nice to speak to you.
Thank you. And the Professor's book is Blushing and the Social Emotion, the Self Unmasked. Thanks for being with us. On tomorrow's show, what happens when affluent Western nations decide to help Africa? Does it really help? Don't forget, do you have any thoughts? You can send them as emails to riz@aljazeera.net. We'll see you next time. Street Talk is coming up next.